London, 1801. The rain fell in sheets across Mayfair, turning the cobblestones into mirrors that reflected the gaslights like fallen stars. Inside the grand ballroom of Blackwood House, however, the world sparkled with a different kind of illumination, chandeliers dripping with crystals, silks that whispered secrets with every movement, and jewels that caught the candlelight and threw it back in defiant bursts of colour. Duke Adrian Blackwood stood at the edge of the festivities, a glass of brandy untouched in his hand, watching the parade of London's finest society swirl before him like a kaleidoscope of ambition and pretense. He was 32 years old and had everything a man could desire: wealth that could purchase kingdoms, influence that extended from Parliament to the Prince Regent's inner circle, and a face that had been described by more than one bold society matron as devastatingly handsome. His dark hair fell in waves that he refused to powder in the old fashion, and his grey eyes held an intelligence that most found either captivating or unsettling, depending on whether they stood to benefit from his favour or feared his displeasure. Tonight, those eyes surveyed the room with the detachment of a man who had seen this performance 1,000 times and found it increasingly hollow. Lady Catherine Ashford glided toward him, her emerald gown cut daringly low, her smile practiced and perfect. She was the season's most celebrated beauty, the daughter of an earl, and exactly the sort of woman everyone expected Adrian to marry. She had been throwing herself in his path for months with a persistence that might have been admirable if it weren't so transparent. "Your Grace," she breathed, executing a curtsy that managed to display her considerable assets while maintaining the barest pretense of propriety. "Such a magnificent ball. You've outdone yourself." "Lady Catherine," Adrian acknowledged with a slight bow, "I'm pleased you're enjoying yourself." She moved closer and he caught the scent of her perfume, something French and expensive and utterly forgettable. "I wonder if you might honour me with a dance. The waltz is just beginning and I should hate to waste such lovely music." Adrian opened his mouth to decline politely when something shifted in the air of the ballroom. It was nothing tangible, nothing anyone else would have noticed, but he felt it like a change in atmospheric pressure before a storm. His gaze swept the room, searching for the source of his unease, and then he saw her. She stood near the entrance, half hidden behind a marble column, and for a moment Adrian thought his mind had conjured her from the depths of memory and longing. Elena Hawthorne. The name burned through his consciousness like lightning. She wore a simple gown of dove grey, utterly out of place among the peacock splendour of London's elite, and her dark hair was pulled back in an unfashionable but elegant chignon. But it was her eyes, those extraordinary violet eyes that had haunted his dreams for 3 years, that held him transfixed across the crowded room. Lady Catherine was still speaking, her words washing over him like meaningless noise. Without a word of explanation or apology, Adrian walked away from her, moving through the crowd with the single-minded purpose of a man who had just seen salvation or damnation and couldn't quite tell which. People parted before him, sensing something in his expression that discouraged interference. He was dimly aware of the whispers that followed in his wake, but they meant nothing. Nothing mattered except reaching her before she disappeared again. She saw him coming. He watched recognition and something else, fear, pain, flash across her face. For a heartbeat he thought she might run, and his pace quickened. But she held her ground, lifting her chin in that defiant gesture he remembered so well, and waited for him to reach her. Eleanor. Her name emerged rough, as if he'd forgotten how to say it properly. Up close he could see the changes 3 years had wrought. She was thinner, the delicate bones of her face more pronounced. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and worry. But she was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with fashion or society's narrow definitions, and everything to do with the fierce intelligence in her gaze and the quiet strength in her bearing. "Your Grace." Her voice was cool, formal, and the words hit him like a physical blow. Once she had called him Adrian. Once she had whispered his name in the darkness, with a tenderness that had made him believe he could be more than his title, more than his duty. "What are you doing here?" He hadn't meant it to sound like an accusation, but 3 years of anger and hurt and desperate longing couldn't be contained in polite pleasantries. Something flickered in her eyes, That same fire, he remembered, the spirit that had drawn him to her in the first place. I was invited. Lady Pemberton is my employer, and she insisted I accompany her tonight, though I'm beginning to think it was a mistake to come. Your employer? Adrian's mind raced. The last he had known, Eleanor was the daughter of a respected physician, educated far beyond what was typical for women of her station, with dreams of opening her own school for girls. What happened to your father? Pain lanced across her features so quickly he almost missed it. He died 2 years ago. Consumption. The words hit him like a fist to the gut. Dr. Hawthorne had been a good man, one of the few people in London who had treated Adrian as something more than a title to be courted or a purse to be plundered. Eleanor, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. How could you? Her voice was quiet but edged with something sharp. You made it quite clear 3 years ago that you wanted nothing more to do with me or my family. Adrian felt the accusation like a blade between his ribs, made more painful because it held a grain of truth twisted into a weapon. That's not what happened, and you know it. Do I? She glanced around again, clearly uncomfortable with their public venue. Your Grace, this is neither the time nor the place for this conversation. Lady Pemberton will be looking for me, and you have guests to attend to. I should never have come. She turned to leave, and something inside Adrian snapped. He caught her wrist, his grip gentle but firm. Don't. Please, not again. Don't run from me again. Elena looked down at his hand on her wrist, then back up at his face. For a moment he saw everything he'd lost reflected in her eyes. The connection they'd shared, the understanding, the possibility of something real in a world built on pretense. Then her expression shuttered, and she carefully extracted her arm from his grasp. I didn't run from you, Adrian. His name in her mouth was both a benediction and a curse. You pushed me away the moment your world demanded it. You chose your title, your reputation, your precious standing in society. You chose all of that over me. So don't you dare act as if I'm the one who left. Before he could respond, before he could explain or defend or beg, she slipped into the crowd and vanished, leaving him standing alone in a ballroom full of people, feeling more isolated than he had in 3 years of carefully cultivated solitude. He had spent 3 years trying to convince himself that what they'd shared was an infatuation, a temporary madness brought on by loneliness and her unconventional appeal. 3 years telling himself that duty and honor demanded he marry someone suitable, someone who understood the weight of his title and the responsibilities that came with it. 3 years pretending that he could be content with a loveless alliance that would produce heirs and maintain the Blackwood legacy. 3 years lying to himself, because seeing Elena again, hearing her voice, catching the scent of lavender that always clung to her hair, it had torn down every wall he'd built, every rationalization he'd constructed. The truth was undeniable and devastating. He had never stopped loving her, not for a moment, not for a breath. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced pleasantries and diplomatic smiles. Adrian played his part perfectly, but every moment his awareness tracked through the room, searching for a glimpse of dove grey, listening for a particular voice that never came again. Eleanor had left, slipping away like morning mist, and the absence felt like a physical ache. It was past 3 in the morning when the last guests finally departed, and Adrian retreated to his study with a bottle of brandy and a determination that bordered on obsession. He stood at the window, looking out over the rain-soaked streets of Mayfair, and allowed himself to remember. He had met Elena Hawthorne 4 years ago, under circumstances that society would have deemed entirely inappropriate. Her father, Dr. Hawthorne, had been summoned to Blackwood House to treat one of Adrian's servants who had fallen seriously ill. Adrian, unable to sleep and wandering his own halls, had encountered the doctor leaving just before dawn, and invited him to share a cup of coffee before facing the cold morning. Dr. Hawthorne had accepted, and over the next hour, Adrian had discovered a man of remarkable intelligence and integrity who treated a duke with the same respect he would afford any other human being, no more, no less. It had been refreshing beyond measure. When the doctor mentioned that his daughter served as his assistant and shared his passion for healing, Adrian had been intrigued. Elena had arrived at their next meeting dressed practically, carrying her father's medical bag, her eyes bright with curiosity and intelligence. She had none of the simpering deference he was accustomed to from women of society. When he asked her opinion on a medical matter, she answered directly, citing research and case studies, debating points with a precision that would have put most Oxford scholars to shame. She challenged him, made him think, made him laugh. By the end of that first meeting, Adrian had been fascinated. By the end of the second, he had been in love. It had been a slow-burning thing at first, built on conversations and shared interests, and a growing recognition that here, finally, was someone who saw him as simply Adrian rather than the Duke of Blackwood. They had begun meeting in secret, not because their interactions were improper in the physical sense, but because they both understood that society would never accept a duke's interest in a physician's daughter. Somewhere in those stolen hours, friendship had deepened into something more profound. Perhaps it was the afternoon in the British Museum when she had explained the Rosetta Stone with such passion that he'd forgotten to listen to her words and simply watched the way her eyes lit up with excitement. Perhaps it was the evening in Hyde Park when she had challenged his assumptions about class and privilege with such fierce conviction that he'd wanted to both argue with her and kiss her. By the time he fully recognized what he felt, it was too late. He was irretrievably, devastatingly in love with a woman he could never marry. Because the Duke of Blackwood didn't marry for love. He married for alliance, for political advantage, for the continuation of a bloodline that stretched back centuries. Elena Hawthorne, for all her brilliance and beauty and the way she made him feel truly alive for the first time in his life, was not appropriate. Then his uncle, the Earl of Pemberton, had paid him a visit. The Earl had been direct, as was his nature. Word had gotten out about Adrian's interest in Miss Hawthorne. Certain members of the ton were beginning to talk. The Prince Regent himself had expressed concern. "You have a responsibility," his uncle had said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Not just to your family name, but to everyone who depends on you. You are not simply a man, Adrian. You are a duke. Your marriage will affect hundreds, perhaps thousands of lives. You cannot be selfish enough to let your heart dictate decisions that will have such far-reaching consequences." The words had landed like hammer blows. His uncle was right. He had responsibilities that extended far beyond his own desires. More than that, marrying Elena would destroy her. Society would never accept her. She would be constantly compared to other duchesses and found wanting. She would be cut by former friends, whispered about at every gathering. Her dreams of opening a school would be impossible. Her father's medical practice would suffer. If he truly loved her, his uncle had argued, he would let her go. Adrian had sat in this very study that night and made the hardest decision of his life. He had written to Elena, telling her that their relationship had been a mistake, that he had allowed himself to forget his obligations, that he wished her well, but could not continue seeing her. He had not explained. He had simply ended it, quickly and decisively. He had thought it would be easier that way, clean, final, leaving no room for doubt or second thoughts. He had convinced himself that she would be hurt initially, but would eventually understand and move on to a life better suited to her. He had been a fool. Elena hadn't responded to his letter. She had simply disappeared. When he had finally broken down weeks later and gone to her father's house, he had found it empty. Dr. Hawthorne's new address was in a less fashionable part of London, and when Adrian had tracked him down, the doctor had received him with a coldness that had cut deeper than anger would have. "My daughter is no longer in London," Dr. Hawthorne had said, his voice clipped and formal. "I have sent her to stay with relatives in the country where she can recover from the disappointment of believing that a man of honor lived behind a noble title. I suggest, Your Grace, that you forget you ever knew her and allow her the same courtesy." Adrian had left and he had tried to forget. He had courted appropriate ladies and attended appropriate functions and played the role of the perfect duke. And every single day he had felt Elena's absence like a missing piece of his soul. Now she was back, not by choice apparently, but driven by circumstances, her father's death, the need for employment. And she hated him. The look in her eyes tonight had made that abundantly clear. Adrian set down his brandy glass with a decisive click. He had lived with his mistake long enough. He had been dutiful, responsible, appropriate for 3 years. And what had it gained him? Nothing but empty halls and emptier days. If fate was giving him a second chance, if Elena was back in London, within reach, still unmarried, Then he would not waste this opportunity. He would fight for her. Consequences be damned. The decision should have felt reckless or frightening. Instead, it felt like the first truly right thing he had done in years. Adrian spent the following days in a state of controlled urgency that would have been unrecognizable to anyone accustomed to his usual measured demeanor. He made careful inquiries about Lady Pemberton's household, speaking discreetly with servants and acquaintances, piecing together information about Elena's current situation. He learned that she resided there as a combination companion and tutor to the lady's grandchildren, that she kept to herself and rarely ventured into society, that she had become known for her quiet competence and gentle way with the children. And he discovered with some irony that Lady Pemberton was indeed the wife of his uncle, the Earl of Pemberton. The same uncle who had convinced him to abandon Eleanor now employed her, apparently unaware of their history. The universe, Adrian reflected bitterly, had a dark sense of humor. He considered calling upon Lady Pemberton directly, but dismissed the idea almost immediately. She was a notorious gossip, and any unusual attention from him would be noted and discussed throughout London within hours. No, he needed to be more subtle, to create an opportunity to speak with Elena privately without drawing the immediate attention of the ton. He needed time and space away from prying eyes. It was Marcus who inadvertently provided the solution. They were at their club one evening, and Adrian was doing a poor job of pretending to pay attention to the card game before them. Marcus was studying his cards with the intense concentration of a man who was losing badly at whist when he mentioned, almost offhandedly, that Lady Pemberton was hosting a small house party at her country estate in Surrey the following week. "Just family and close friends," Marcus said, discarding a card. "My mother received an invitation and is dragging me along. Apparently it's all very informal. Walks in the countryside, quiet dinners, that sort of thing. Your uncle will be there, naturally, and you know how he appreciates your company. You should come." Adrian's mind raced ahead, seeing possibilities unfold. A country house party would provide numerous opportunities for private conversation away from the watchful eyes of London society. The informal atmosphere would make it easier to engineer moments alone with Elena, and if his uncle was there, perhaps it was time to begin the difficult conversations that would need to happen if he was serious about pursuing Elena again. "Is it too late to secure an invitation?" Adrian asked, trying to keep his voice casual despite the sudden urgency thrumming through his veins. Marcus glanced up in surprise, one eyebrow raised. "I wouldn't think so. Lady Pemberton would be thrilled to have you, the Duke of Blackwood at her house party. She'd dine out on that story for months. Why the sudden interest in a quiet gathering in Surrey? I thought you were courting Lady Catherine and couldn't spare time away from London." "I'm not courting anyone," Adrian said more sharply than he intended. He took a breath, moderating his tone. "Send word to Lady Pemberton that I would be honored to attend, if she'll have me." Marcus gave him a searching look that suggested he wasn't buying the casual explanation, but he was too good a friend to press when Adrian clearly didn't want to elaborate. "I'll send word in the morning. Though I have to say, you're acting rather odd lately. Ever since your ball last week, you've been distracted. Is everything all right?" "Everything is about to be," Adrian said cryptically, "or it will be a complete disaster. I'm not yet certain which." The invitation arrived the next day, written in Lady Pemberton's elaborate hand, expressing her absolute delight that her dear nephew would be joining their humble gathering. Adrian read it with grim satisfaction, mixed with anxiety. He had his opportunity. Now he simply had to ensure that Elena didn't flee the moment he arrived, and that he could find the words to explain 3 years of mistakes and regret in a way that might possibly earn him a second chance. He spent the intervening days preparing, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was preparing for. He visited Dr. Hawthorne's grave in Highgate Cemetery one rainy afternoon, standing alone among the weathered headstones while he apologized to a man who could no longer hear him. He told the doctor about seeing Elena again, about his plans to fight for her this time, about his hope that somehow he might earn the forgiveness he didn't deserve. The rain mixed with tears on his face, and he stayed there until the groundskeeper gently reminded him that the cemetery would be closing soon. He sorted through his affairs with an attention to detail that alarmed his steward, as if he were preparing for an extended absence or a significant life change. He reviewed estate accounts, signed documents that had been waiting for his attention, and made provisions for various contingencies. His steward asked if His Grace was planning to travel abroad, and Adrian had simply said that he was preparing for the future, whatever form it might take. He wrote and discarded a dozen letters to Elena, each one an attempt to explain the inexplicable, to justify the unjustifiable, to somehow convey in words the depth of his regret and the strength of his enduring love. But every attempt felt hollow, inadequate to the task. How did one apologize for breaking someone's heart? How did one explain that cowardice masquerading as nobility had destroyed the best thing in one's life? In the end, he sent nothing. Whatever he needed to say to her, it couldn't be contained in a letter. He had tried that once before, and the result had been 3 years of misery for them both. This time he would face her directly, accept her anger and her hurt, and pray that somewhere beneath the pain a spark of what they had shared still survived. The journey to Surrey took most of a day, and Adrian arrived at Pemberton Manor just as the sun was setting. Lady Pemberton greeted him warmly, chattering about the other guests. "We're having the children dine with us tonight," she said. "Miss Hawthorne has been working so diligently with them. Such a treasure, that girl." An hour later, Adrian descended to the drawing room where guests were gathering before dinner. He positioned himself where he could see the doorway, waiting. She appeared with 2 children flanking her, like small honor guards. She had dressed more carefully than she had for his ball, wearing a gown of deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes. Then she saw him, and the warmth vanished. For a moment, she froze. Slowly, she crossed the room toward him. "Your Grace." Her voice was cool, controlled. "I was not aware you would be attending this gathering. Had I known, I would have made arrangements to absent myself." "Would you have?" He kept his own voice low. "Run away again rather than face me?" Fire sparked in her eyes. "I did not run away. Not 3 years ago, and not now." "Then speak with me," Adrian said. "After dinner, when the others have retired. Grant me an hour, Elena. 1 hour to explain. If you still want nothing to do with me after that, I'll leave tomorrow and never trouble you again." She studied his face. Finally, she gave a single, sharp nod. 1 hour, in the library, tomorrow evening after the children are in bed, 9 o'clock. "Thank you." Dinner was torture. Adrian tried to follow the conversation around him, but his attention kept drifting to Eleanor. After dinner, he endured an hour of political discussion before making his excuses and retiring to his room. Sleep was impossible. The next day crawled past with agonizing slowness. Elena moved through it all like a ghost at the edges of his vision, there but untouchable. By the time evening arrived, Adrian felt wound tight enough to snap. He arrived at the library 15 minutes early. When the door finally opened and Elena slipped inside, he had to physically restrain himself from crossing the room and pulling her into his arms. She didn't sit, instead remaining near the door. "You said you wanted to explain. I'm listening." Adrian took a breath. 3 years ago, I wrote you a letter that was cruel and cowardly and completely inadequate. I told myself I was doing the right thing, the noble thing, but the truth is, I was a fool who let fear and duty override everything that actually mattered. I pushed you away because I convinced myself it was for your own good, that loving me would destroy everything you cared about. I was wrong. "You're right about one thing," Eleanor said, her voice hard. "That letter was cruel. Do you have any idea what it did to me?" "No." The word came out fierce. "You were never a distraction. You were everything. You were the only real thing in my entire artificial life." "Then why?" The question was barely a whisper. "Why did you end it?" "Because my uncle came to me. He told me that the entire ton was beginning to talk, that marrying you would be a scandal that would destroy not just me, but you as well. He said that if I truly loved you, I would let you go, would let you have a life free from the stain of association with me." Elena's eyes widened. "That's what you believed? That you were protecting me by breaking my heart?" "I believed that I could not be selfish enough to ruin your life for my own happiness. You had dreams, Elena. Your school, your work in medicine, your father's practice. If you had married me, society would have destroyed all of that. So you made the decision for both of us," Elena said, her voice shaking with anger. "You decided what I could and couldn't handle. You never asked me, you never gave me a choice, you just ended it. I know. Adrian's hands clenched at his sides. I thought I was being noble, sacrificing my happiness for yours, but all I did was make us both miserable. I was arrogant enough to think I knew what was best for you, when the truth is I was just a coward. So instead I broke your heart and spent 3 years breaking my own. Eleanor turned away from him. Do you know what happened after I received your letter? I couldn't breathe. My father found me on the floor of my room, still clutching that awful piece of paper, and he thought I was dying. In a way, I suppose I was. The words were like knives. Adrian wanted to look away, but he forced himself to stand witness to the pain he had caused. My father took me to his sister's home in Cornwall, Eleanor continued. He thought the sea air would help, but you can't heal from something when you don't understand why it happened. I kept reading your letter, trying to find some explanation. There was none. You simply stopped wanting me. I never stopped wanting you. The words burst from Adrian with desperate force. Not for a single day, not for a single moment. I courted other women because it was expected, but every one of them was measured against you and found wanting. I tried to forget you, Elena. God, how I tried, but you are, written on my soul. She turned back to face him. Do you know what's worse than being forgotten? Being remembered. Because if you truly never stopped loving me, then you chose to hurt both of us for nothing. You had a choice, Adrian. You could have fought for us, but you didn't. You chose the easy path. You call the last 3 years easy? Adrian's voice rose. You think it was easy to watch you disappear, to spend every day wondering where you were, to pretend that my life had meaning when the only person who ever made me feel truly alive was gone? Then why are you here now? Elena demanded. What's changed? Your uncle still expects you to marry appropriately. Society still expects you to choose duty over desire. So why now, Adrian? Because you came back. The simple truth of it rang through the library. Because fate put you in that ballroom, and the moment I saw you, I knew. All the reasons I told myself for staying away, they meant nothing. You were there, and I wasn't strong enough to let you disappear again. Elena shook her head slowly. You're asking for something I can't give you. My father died believing that I had thrown my heart away on a man who saw me as beneath him. I watched consumption take him slowly, and through it all he blamed himself for not protecting me better from people like you. That's the legacy of your choice, Adrian. The guilt that crashed over Adrian was almost physical. I'm sorry. God, Elena, I'm so sorry. But you can't undo it, she interrupted. What's done is done. My father is gone. Those 3 years are lost, and I'm not the same person I was. I have a position that provides me with security and purpose. I won't risk it all again on pretty words and promises that evaporate the moment they're inconvenient. Adrian felt something cold settle in his chest, but looking at her, seeing the pain etched into every line of her face, he knew he couldn't accept it. Not yet. I'm not asking you to risk anything on words alone, he said quietly. I'm asking you to let me prove that I've changed, that I'm done choosing duty over happiness. I'm asking for a chance to show you that I'm willing to fight for us this time, regardless of the consequences. And what does that mean exactly? Elena's voice was heavy with skepticism. No. Adrian took a deep breath. I'm proposing that I stop living my life according to other people's expectations, that I acknowledge publicly that my affections are engaged, that I court you openly, properly, and accept whatever consequences come from that choice. Eleanor stared at him as if he had lost his mind. You can't be serious. The scandal would be tremendous. Everything you've worked for would be destroyed. Then let it be destroyed. The words came out with a conviction that surprised even him. What good is influence if I can't use it to secure my own happiness? I've spent 3 years being the perfect duke, Elena, and I've been miserable every moment of it. I'm done pretending that this half-life is enough. You're not thinking clearly. Elena moved toward him now. You'll regret this. 6 months from now, when the reality settles in, you'll resent me. And I couldn't survive that, Adrian. I couldn't survive loving you again only to watch you come to regret your choice. He reached for her then, his hands gentle on her shoulders. I have lived with regret for 3 years. I know exactly what it feels like to make the wrong choice and pay for it every single day. The only thing I regret about loving you is that I didn't fight for you when I had the chance. I won't make that mistake again." "This is madness," Elena whispered, but she didn't pull away. "You barely know me anymore." "Then let me know you again," Adrian said softly. "Let me learn who you've become. Let me prove that I'm worthy of a second chance. I'm not asking you to commit to anything beyond allowing me to court you. If you decide I'm not worth the risk, then I'll accept that. But give me the opportunity to try." Elena closed her eyes. When she opened them again, there was a vulnerability there that made his heart ache. "Why should I believe you? What's different this time?" "This." Adrian released her shoulders and stepped back. "Tomorrow morning I'm going to speak with my uncle. I'm going to tell him that I have no intention of marrying Lady Catherine or anyone else he might suggest. I'm going to tell him that my affections are engaged elsewhere and that I plan to pursue those affections regardless of his approval. And then I'm going to return to London and make my intentions known publicly." "Adrian." "I'm not finished." He held up a hand. "I know what I'm asking of you. I know you have no reason to trust me, so I'm going to prove it. I'm going to court you the way I should have 3 years ago, openly, honorably, with the full knowledge of society. If that means I lose my position, if it means I become a pariah, so be it. You're worth more than all of that combined." Tears were sliding down Elena's cheeks now. "You're asking me to be responsible for your social destruction?" "Because this time, the choice is yours," Adrian said gently. "I'm not deciding for you what you can or cannot handle. I'm laying out exactly what I'm offering, myself, damaged reputation and all, and letting you decide if it's enough. If you say no, I'll accept that. But I won't make the decision for you again." Elena stood there, tears streaming down her face. Finally, she spoke. "I need time. I need to think about this when I'm not standing in front of you. Can you give me that?" "Take all the time you need," Adrian said. "I'll be at Blackwood House in London. When you're ready, if you're ready, send word." She nodded slowly. "I should go." "Eleanor." He waited until she looked at him. "I meant every word. I love you. I've loved you since the day you explained the circulatory system to me, with more passion than most people discuss art or music. I will love you whether you decide to give me another chance or not. That won't change." Fresh tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't speak. She simply turned and fled from the library. True to his word, Adrian sought out the Earl of Pemberton immediately after breakfast. His uncle received him in his study. "Uncle, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interruption." Something in his tone made the Earl's jovial expression fade. "Very well. Speak your piece." "I will not be courting Lady Catherine or any other woman you or society deems appropriate." Adrian kept his voice level. "My affections are engaged elsewhere, and I intend to pursue those affections regardless of any social consequences." The Earl's face began to redden. "Now see here. You told me 3 years ago that I had a responsibility to my family. You convinced me that personal happiness was selfish when weighed against duty. I listened to you then, and it was the greatest mistake of my life." Adrian met his uncle's gaze steadily. "I'm done making that mistake." "You're talking about that girl," the Earl said. "Miss Hawthorne." "Adrian, for God's sake, she's completely unsuitable." "She is the woman I love," Adrian interrupted. "And I am going to court her. I wanted you to hear it from me first, but make no mistake, Uncle. This is not a discussion or a negotiation. This is simply information." The Earl stood. "You'll be ruined. Your political alliances will crumble." "Possibly." Adrian felt a strange calm settling over him. "But I'll have what matters. I'll have a chance at genuine happiness instead of a lifetime of emptiness dressed up as duty." "You're a fool," his uncle said. "Perhaps," Adrian acknowledged, "but I'd rather be a fool in pursuit of love than a success drowning in regret. I've tried it your way, Uncle. Now I'm going to try mine." He left before the Earl could respond, feeling lighter than he had in years. He departed Pemberton Manor within the hour. He didn't see Eleanor before he left, though he looked for her. Perhaps it was better that way. Now he had to prove through action that his words were more than empty promises. The journey back to London gave him time to plan. He would need to speak with his solicitor. He would need to shore up alliances with friends he could trust. But first, He needed to make a grand gesture, something public, something that would make his intentions crystal clear to both Eleanor and society. The idea came to him as his carriage rolled through the outskirts of London, and it was perfect. It was also completely scandalous, utterly inappropriate, and exactly the sort of thing that would set the ton buzzing for months. Adrian spent the next 2 days in a flurry of activity. He met with his solicitor, who was horrified but dutiful. He spoke with Marcus, who listened and then clapped him on the shoulder. "About bloody time. I've been watching you die slowly for 3 years." He made arrangements with various merchants and craftsmen. On the evening of the 3rd day, everything was ready. Adrian stood in his study, looking at the documents spread across his desk, and knew there was no turning back. Once he did this, there would be consequences he couldn't control or predict. But Elena would know. She would know that he meant every word. Adrian sent word to every major newspaper in London. He placed announcements in the Times, the Morning Post, the London Gazette. And then he commissioned something that would either be remembered as the height of romance or the depths of foolishness. The morning his announcement appeared in the Times, London erupted in scandal. The Duke of Blackwood had publicly declared his intention to court Miss Elena Hawthorne, companion to Lady Pemberton, possessing neither title nor fortune. The notice was simple but devastating. The Duke of Blackwood wishes to make known his sincere and honourable intentions toward Miss Elena Hawthorne, and respectfully requests that she grant him the opportunity to prove himself worthy of her regard. By noon, Adrian's calling room was filled with visitors expressing shock, disappointment, and a few their support. Lady Catherine's father arrived, demanding to know what had possessed Adrian. Adrian apologized sincerely for any pain caused and did not budge from his position. His uncle came, angrier than Adrian had ever seen him. They argued for an hour, but Adrian remained unmoved. Finally, the Earl departed with a warning that Adrian was on his own. Marcus came last, bearing whiskey and a grin. "You've certainly set the cat among the pigeons. Half the men at White's are calling you a fool, and the other half are secretly envious." "And what of Miss Hawthorne?" Adrian asked. "Ah, that's the question, isn't it? She's still at Pemberton Manor as far as anyone knows. No one knows if she's seen the announcement or how she's reacted to it." 2 more days passed with no word from Elena. Adrian endured his meeting with the Prince Regent, who expressed severe disappointment. Adrian thanked him for his concern and politely declined to reconsider. He attended a dinner where the atmosphere was distinctly chilly. He received letters from distant relatives expressing dismay and a few old friends offering support. And still no word from Elena. On the 3rd day, a letter arrived. Adrian's hands shook as he recognized the handwriting. "Your Grace, I have seen your announcement. I have also endured 3 days of intense discussion with Lady Pemberton, who is horrified by the scandal, fascinated by the romance, and uncertain whether to dismiss me or promote me. She has given me a week's leave to come to London and speak with you in person. What you have done is either the most romantic gesture I have ever witnessed or the most foolish. Part of me is furious with you for making such a decision so publicly. Part of me is terrified that you will come to regret this grand gesture. And part of me, the part I have been trying so desperately to ignore, wants to believe that you mean every word. I will arrive in London tomorrow afternoon. I will stay at the Ashford Hotel. If you wish to see me, I will be available after 4 o'clock. I make no promises beyond a conversation, Adrian, but I need you to understand that if we pursue this path, there is no going back. If I reject you now, it will be the subject of gossip for months. If I accept you, we will both bear the consequences for the rest of our lives. Come to me tomorrow, and we will talk. But come prepared to convince me that this is more than romantic impulse. Show me that you truly understand what you are asking of both of us." Eleanor Adrian read the letter 3 times. She hadn't said yes, but she hadn't said no. She was giving him another chance. It was more than he deserved and everything he had hoped for. He spent the rest of the day preparing. Not preparing what he would say, those words came from his heart, but preparing what he would show her, evidence that his devotion was more than words. He gathered documents, letters, proof of the choices he had already made. He wanted her to see exactly what he was offering. The next afternoon found Adrian standing outside the Ashford Hotel at precisely 4 o'clock, his heart pounding. He climbed the stairs to her room, feeling the weight of everything riding on the next hour. Elena answered his knock almost immediately. She wore a simple day dress of pale green. In the afternoon light, she looked achingly beautiful and heartbreakingly uncertain. "Your Grace," she said formally. "Adrian," he corrected gently. "Please, Elena. Just Adrian." She stepped aside to let him enter. She gestured for him to take a chair, then sat across from him. "You've caused quite a scandal," she said. "I know." Adrian leaned forward. "I meant to. I needed you to understand that I was serious, that this wasn't empty words. I needed society to know, to make it impossible for me to retreat or change my mind." "And have you?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Changed your mind, now that you've felt the consequences?" "No." The word was absolute. "If anything, the last few days have only confirmed that I made the right choice. I've lost some political appointments. I've been cut by people I thought were friends. My uncle has disowned me, at least temporarily. The Prince Regent is furious with me." He paused. "And I have never been more certain of anything in my life, because all of that, all the power and influence and social standing, it means nothing without you. I've had it all for 3 years and I've been miserable. I would rather be a pauper with you than a duke without you." Elena's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You say that now, but what about in 5 years, 10, when you realize what you've sacrificed and you resent me for it?" "Then I'm a fool who didn't deserve you in the first place," Adrian said. "But I don't believe that will happen. Do you know why?" He reached into his jacket and withdrew a sheaf of papers. "Because I've been making choices, Elena. Real choices with real consequences. Let me show you." He spread the documents across the small table between them. "This is a letter from the Education Reform Committee, accepting my resignation. I resigned, Elena. I didn't wait to be pushed out. I chose to step down because their work is not as important as being with you." He placed another document on top. "This is a deed to a property in Bloomsbury. It has space for classrooms, a library, room for boarders. I've purchased it and put it in trust specifically for establishing a school for girls, the school you always dreamed of opening. Whether you marry me or not, it's yours. Your dream shouldn't die because I was too cowardly to fight for it 3 years ago." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling over. Adrian continued, his voice thick with emotion. "This is a letter to all my tenants, informing them of reforms you talked about years ago. Better housing, fair rents, education opportunities for their children. I'm trying to be the kind of man you believed I could be." He pulled out another paper. "This is a letter from 3 gentlemen interested in partnering with me on medical research initiatives. Dr. Hawthorne's work shouldn't be forgotten. I've set aside funds to ensure that happens, to create a foundation in his name that will support medical advancement. Your father believed in using knowledge to help people. I want to honor that." Elena was openly crying now. He set down the final document. "And this is a new will. I've restructured everything. If I die, half maintains Blackwood House and the title's obligations, and half in trust supports the school, the medical foundation, and you. You'll never have to depend on anyone. You'll be free to pursue your work, your dreams. Because even if you choose not to marry me, I want you to have the life you deserve." He sat back, drained. "These are not promises of what I'll do, Elena. These are things I've already done. Choices I've already made. I'm asking you to look at my actions and judge whether they demonstrate the kind of man I want to be, the kind of man you need me to be." Elena stood abruptly and turned toward the window, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Adrian remained seated, giving her space. Long minutes passed in silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse. "Why didn't you do this 3 years ago?" "Because I was a coward," Adrian said simply. "Because I convinced myself that duty was more important than love. Because I believed the lies society tells us, that reputation matters more than happiness. I was wrong, Elena, about all of it, and I've spent 3 years paying for that mistake." She turned to face him. "I loved you so much. Do you have any idea how much? I would have given up everything for you. But you didn't ask. You made the decision for me, and that hurt worse than anything." "I know." Adrian stood, moving toward her but stopping just out of reach. And I can't undo that hurt. I can't give you back those 3 years. All I can do is promise that I will never make that mistake again. I will never decide for you what you can or cannot handle. If we face challenges, and we will, we'll face them together. If society cuts us, we'll build our own society. But we'll do it together, as partners. Or not at all. Elena wrapped her arms around herself. I need you to understand something. If I agree to this, there is no going back. We will be bound together by scandal, if nothing else. Every difficulty we face, you cannot blame me for them. You cannot look at me with regret. I won't, Adrian said, because I haven't lost anything that matters. I've gained everything, if you'll have me. She studied his face, searching. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she took a shaky breath and nodded. Then you may court me, Adrian Blackwood. Properly, publicly, and prepare yourself for the consequences. Because I will not make this easy on you. I will test your resolve at every turn, and if I see even a hint that you regret this choice, I will walk away and never look back. Relief flooded through Adrian so powerfully his knees nearly buckled. That's all I ask. A chance to prove myself. Then we have an understanding. Elena wiped at her tears, a tremulous smile breaking through. Though I suspect we're both fools for this. Perhaps, Adrian agreed, but I've learned that being a fool for love is infinitely preferable to being wise and miserable. And then, because he couldn't help himself any longer, Adrian closed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms. She came willingly, her head against his chest, her arms wrapping around his waist. They stood there in the afternoon light, holding each other, and for the first time in 3 years, Adrian felt whole. I love you, he whispered into her hair. I never stopped. I never will. I know, Elena murmured, and God help me, I still love you too. I tried not to, but I couldn't. You've always been there in my heart. I just needed to know you felt the same way. I do, Adrian promised, and I will prove it to you every day for the rest of our lives. When they finally pulled apart, Elena's eyes were red but clearer. So what happens now? Adrian laughed. Whatever you prefer. Though I suspect after the announcement in the Times, traditional propriety might be a lost cause. Probably, Elena agreed. But let's try anyway. I'd like to do this properly, Adrian. Courting walks in the park, visits with chaperones, time to truly know each other again. We need to learn who we've become before we decide who we'll be together. Wise as always, Adrian said. Then we'll do it your way. A proper courtship, however unconventional the circumstances. Let them watch, Elena said with a flash of spirit. Let them see that love can triumph over convention. Maybe we'll inspire someone else to be brave enough to follow their heart. Adrian lifted her hand to his lips. Then we'll give them a romance worth watching. Starting tomorrow, I'd like to call on you properly. Flowers, chocolates, respectful conversation, the whole traditional courtship experience. I'd like that, Elena said softly. But Adrian, no more grand gestures without consulting me first. We're partners in this. Your decisions affect both of us now. Agreed, Adrian said immediately, though I reserve the right to surprise you occasionally with romantic gestures. That I can accept, Elena said, her smile growing warmer. Now, you should probably go. I'd rather not add spending the evening alone in a hotel room with a gentleman to my list of scandals just yet. Adrian reluctantly agreed. At the door, he turned back. Tomorrow, then? Around 2 o'clock? Tomorrow, Elena confirmed. And Adrian, thank you for fighting for me this time, for choosing love over duty. It means more than you know. Everything I have is worthless without you, Adrian said simply. Tomorrow cannot come soon enough. The following months unfolded like a dream. True to their agreement, he courted Elena properly, despite the unconventional circumstances. He called on her at the Ashford Hotel, always bringing flowers, always punctual. They walked in Hyde Park while curious onlookers whispered and stared. They attended the theatre, always in public view, enduring the stares with grace and determination. It was not easy. The scandal continued to reverberate. Lady Catherine's family publicly cut him at a ball. His uncle maintained his distance. Several former political allies made it clear that his support was no longer welcome. But for every door that closed, others opened. Adrian found himself welcomed into different circles, intellectuals and reformers, doctors and educators, people who valued ideas over pedigree. Eleanor introduced him to her friends, and Adrian discovered a world full of passionate debates and genuine purpose. He attended lectures at medical colleges, helped organize funding for educational initiatives, and discovered that influence came in many forms. Most importantly, he rediscovered Eleanor. They talked for hours about everything: her work with the children, his estate reforms, their shared dreams for the school. He learned about the years they had spent apart, about her father's final months, and her struggle to find employment. She learned about his 3 years of misery, about the women he had courted without feeling, about the emptiness that had consumed him. Slowly, carefully, they rebuilt trust. Elena tested him, as she had promised. When invited to a prestigious dinner where his presence was tolerated but Elena's was not, Adrian declined without hesitation. When Lady Catherine's father made it clear that Adrian could restore his position by ending his pursuit of Elena, Adrian refused. When the Prince Regent summoned him and suggested his continued association with Miss Hawthorne was damaging, Adrian stood firm. Each test, Adrian passed, and with each victory, the fear in Elena's eyes dimmed and the hope grew stronger. 6 months after their reunion at the Ashford Hotel, Adrian invited Elena to visit Blackwood House. She arrived on a sunny afternoon in early autumn, and Adrian met her at the door. "Welcome," he said, offering his arm. "I hope one day it might be ours." Elena's eyes widened as he led her through the grand entrance hall. "It's beautiful, intimidating but beautiful." "I know it's large," Adrian said. "Too large for one person. I've been thinking about what we discussed, opening parts of it for charitable purposes. The East Wing could be converted into classrooms. The library is certainly big enough to share. I thought perhaps we could use this place as something useful." Elena turned to him, thoughtful. "You've been planning this." "I've been dreaming," Adrian corrected. "Dreaming of a life where this house is full of voices and purpose. But I can't do it alone, Elena. I need you, not just as my wife, but as my partner in building something meaningful." They stood in the center of the grand hall, and Elena reached up to touch his face gently. "You've changed, not just in words, but in truth. You're not the man who pushed me away 3 years ago." "I'm the man you helped me become," Adrian said. "The man I always should have been. You showed me what really matters. I just had to lose you to finally understand." "Then don't lose me again," Elena whispered. "Because I'm done testing you, Adrian. I'm done being afraid. I see who you are now, what you've built, what you're willing to sacrifice. And if you'll still have me, I'd like to choose that life with you." Adrian's heart stuttered. "Elena, are you saying—" "I'm saying yes," she interrupted, her eyes bright. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll be your partner. Yes, I'll help you transform this house. Yes to all of it, Adrian. Yes." He kissed her then, properly and thoroughly, in the middle of his grand entrance hall, not caring who might see. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing, Adrian pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "I've been carrying this for weeks," he admitted, opening it to reveal a ring, a beautiful sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. "The sapphire reminded me of your eyes. Say you'll wear it." "I will," Elena said, her voice choked. "Oh, Adrian, it's perfect." He slid the ring onto her finger, and they stood together, hands clasped, beginning to believe that perhaps they had finally found their way to happiness. The announcement of their engagement sent fresh shockwaves through London society. Some were scandalized. Others declared it the most romantic story they had ever witnessed. The Prince Regent attended their wedding, which surprised everyone. His Royal Highness made it clear that while he disapproved politically, he admitted a grudging respect for a man who would risk everything for love. The ceremony was held at St. George's, Hanover Square, a public declaration of their union. Elena wore a gown of ivory silk, simple but stunning, and she walked down the aisle with her head held high. Adrian thought she had never looked more beautiful, and when she reached his side and placed her hand in his, he felt complete for the first time in his life. They spoke their vows clearly, both meaning every word. They had already proven their commitment before ever speaking them. Now they simply made it official. The wedding breakfast was held at Blackwood House, transformed with flowers and music. Adrian had invited not just members of society, but also Elena's friends, medical colleagues of her father's, and various reformers. It was an eclectic mix that set tongues wagging, but it was genuine, warm, full of well wishes from people who actually cared. As evening fell and guests began departing, Adrian found Elena standing alone in the ballroom, looking out at the gardens. He approached silently, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Regrets?" he asked softly. "None," Elena said firmly. "This day has been perfect. I still can't quite believe it's real." "We have," Adrian confirmed. "You're the Duchess of Blackwood now, though I suspect the worst has already happened. Scandal, disapproval. From here, things can only improve." Eleanor turned in his arms. "Do you regret it? Any of it?" "Not for a moment," Adrian said without hesitation. "I have you, Eleanor. That's all I ever really wanted. Everything else was just noise, but you make me whole. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "Good," Elena said, kissing him softly. "Because we have a lot of work ahead of us. This house to transform, that school to open, lives to build together." "I'm prepared," Adrian assured her. "As long as that lifetime is spent with you, I'm prepared for anything." Over the following years, they proved that their union was more than romance. It was partnership in the truest sense. The school in Bloomsbury opened 18 months after their wedding, offering education to girls regardless of their family's ability to pay. Eleanor oversaw the curriculum, ensuring her students learned science and mathematics alongside art and literature. Adrian used his remaining influence to push for reforms. He might no longer sit on the most prestigious committees, but he found that working directly with reformers was far more satisfying than political maneuvering had ever been. His estates thrived under new management practices. Blackwood House became known not for glittering balls, but for intellectual salons and charitable events. They had children, 3 of them, 2 daughters and a son, each raised with the expectation that they would use their privilege to serve. The daughters grew up attending their mother's school. The son learned from his father that being a duke meant responsibility to those less fortunate. Adrian's uncle eventually reconciled with them, grudgingly admitting that perhaps the duke had made the right choice. Lady Pemberton became one of their staunchest supporters. The Prince Regent mellowed in his disapproval as he watched the good works flowing from Blackwood House. But more than any external validation, what mattered most to Adrian was the life he and Elena built together. Every morning he woke beside the woman he loved. Every evening they shared dinner and conversation. They disagreed sometimes, argued occasionally, faced challenges like any couple, but they faced them together as partners, never making decisions in isolation. On their 10th anniversary, Adrian took Elena back to the British Museum, where they had spent so many stolen hours during their early courtship. "Do you remember the first time we came here?" he asked. "You explained the Rosetta Stone with such passion that I forgot to listen and just watched you instead." "I remember," Elena said, smiling. "I was so nervous I kept talking faster, worried I was boring you." "You could never bore me," Adrian said. "That was the day I started to fall in love with you. You made everything come alive, Elena. You still do." "And you've become everything I knew you could be," Elena said. "Not just a duke, but a good man, a devoted husband, a loving father, a force for positive change. I'm so proud of you, Adrian." "I'm only those things because of you," Adrian said. "You saw potential in me that I didn't see in myself. Everything good in my life flows from loving you." They kissed there in the museum, this time with no fear, no shame. They were husband and wife, partners in life, and they had earned every moment of their happiness. As they walked hand in hand through the galleries, Adrian reflected on the extraordinary journey. He had been born into privilege, raised to believe that title and duty were paramount. He had nearly destroyed his chance at love by believing those lessons too well. But Eleanor had taught him different truths. That love was worth fighting for. That happiness was not selfish but essential. That a life built on genuine connection was infinitely more valuable than one built on empty prestige. She had shown him that being the Duke of Blackwood could mean using that position to create positive change, to make the world better. He thought about the younger version of himself, the man who had written that cowardly letter, who had convinced himself that pushing Elena away was right. If he could go back, he would tell him the truth. That duty without love is an empty cage. That reputation means nothing if you're miserable. That the greatest risk is not in reaching for happiness, but in settling for less. But perhaps that younger Adrian needed to make those mistakes, needed to experience that loss, in order to forge himself into someone strong enough to defy convention, brave enough to risk everything, wise enough to recognize that Elena was the greatest treasure he would ever possess. The scandal that had once threatened to destroy them had faded to a footnote. New scandals had emerged to capture society's attention. The Duke and Duchess of Blackwood had become an established if unconventional presence. They were never invited to the most exclusive events anymore, never sought out for political alliances. But their home was full of warmth and purpose. Their marriage was strong, and their children were growing up with values that would serve them far better than mere social position. That evening, after they returned from the museum, Adrian and Elena stood together in the library, the same room where Elena had once given him an ultimatum, where he had promised to prove himself worthy. "Do you remember standing here 10 years ago?" Adrian asked. "You told me you would test my resolve, that you would watch for any sign of regret." "I remember," Eleanor said, resting her head against his chest. "I was so afraid, Adrian, afraid of trusting you again, afraid of the scandal." "And now?" Adrian asked. "Now I know," Elena said simply. "I know that you meant every word. I know that you chose me not out of guilt or temporary passion, but out of genuine love. I know that I can trust you completely, because you've proven it 1,000 times over." "I will never stop proving it," Adrian promised. "Every day for the rest of my life, I will show you that you made the right choice. I will love you, support you, stand beside you through whatever comes. You are my partner, my equal, my greatest joy." Elena lifted her face to his, her eyes shining with love and trust. "And you are mine, Adrian, my love, my partner, the man who had the courage to choose happiness over duty, to fight for love when it would have been easier to walk away. I am so grateful that fate brought us back together." They kissed there in the library, surrounded by books and memories, sealing promises that had long since been proven true. Outside, London continued its endless dance. But inside Blackwood House, two people who had nearly lost everything had found exactly what they needed, each other. Years continued to pass, marked by milestones both large and small. Their eldest daughter followed in her mother's footsteps, becoming a teacher and eventually opening a second school location. Their younger daughter surprised them by developing a passion for medicine, studying under doctors who had once worked with her grandfather. She faced tremendous opposition. Women physicians were rare and often ridiculed, but she persevered, bolstered by her parents' unwavering support. Their son grew up with a profound sense of responsibility. He worked alongside his father on estate reforms and charitable initiatives, learning that being a duke meant being a steward rather than simply an owner. He eventually married for love, as his father had, choosing a merchant's daughter with a brilliant mind and a passionate commitment to social reform. Adrian and Elena aged together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. Adrian's hair turned silver, and lines appeared around his eyes from decades of laughter. Elena's face showed the marks of time as well, but Adrian thought she grew more beautiful with each passing year. They celebrated their 25th anniversary, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and the many people whose lives they had touched. The school had expanded into a network throughout England. The Medical Foundation had funded crucial research. Blackwood House had become a centre for intellectual and charitable activities. Marcus gave a toast at their celebration. 25 years ago, my dear friend was fool enough to fall in love with a woman society deemed inappropriate. He was wise enough to recognize that society was wrong. He risked everything for love, and in doing so he gained everything worth having. To the Duke and Duchess of Blackwood, may their example inspire us all to choose love over convention, purpose over prestige. The room erupted in applause. Adrian pulled Elena close. Who would have thought that the reckless choice of a desperate man would lead to all this? It wasn't reckless, Elena corrected gently. It was brave. You knew what you wanted, what mattered, and you fought for it. That's not recklessness, Adrian, that's wisdom. As the celebration continued, Adrian reflected on the extraordinary journey, from their first meeting through painful separation, through scandal and reunion, and finally to this, a life rich with purpose and love and family. Every choice, every sacrifice, every moment of courage had led them here. He thought about all the people who had told him he was making a mistake, that he would regret his choice. They had been wrong. Love had been the foundation, certainly, but what he and Elena had built went far beyond simple romance. They had created partnership, purpose, legacy. They had raised children who understood that privilege came with responsibility. They had used their position to create opportunities. They had shown that it was possible to honor one's commitments without sacrificing happiness, to be true to oneself while still contributing to the greater good. As the evening drew to a close, Adrian found himself alone with Elena in the garden. The moon was full, casting silver light over the carefully tended beds. They walked arm in arm, comfortable in their silence. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had a mistake, that he would regret his choice? They had been wrong. Love had been the foundation, certainly, but what he and Elena had built went far beyond simple romance. They had created partnership, purpose, legacy. They had raised children who understood that privilege came with responsibility. They had used their position to create opportunities. They had shown that it was possible to honor one's commitments without sacrificing happiness, to be true to oneself while still contributing to the greater good. As the evening drew to a close, Adrian found himself alone with Elena in the garden. The moon was full, casting silver light over the carefully tended beds. They walked arm in arm, comfortable in their silence. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't come to that ball? Elena asked. If we hadn't seen each other that night? I try not to, Adrian admitted. The thought is too painful. I would have spent the rest of my life going through the motions, never truly living. I would have married someone appropriate, produced heirs, fulfilled my duties, and died having never experienced what we have together. I would have stayed at Pemberton Manor, Elena said, teaching the children, comfortable but unfulfilled. I would have convinced myself that I was content. I would have locked away the part of my heart that loved you and pretended it didn't exist. We were both dying slowly, Adrian said, alive but not living. The 3 years apart taught me that lesson. You can have everything the world says you should want and still be desperately unhappy if you don't have what truly matters. Eleanor stopped and turned to face him, her hands taking his. Promise me something, Adrian. Promise me that no matter how many more years we're given, you'll never regret the choice you made. I promise, Adrian said immediately, fierce with conviction, loving you, fighting for you, building this life with you. These are the only choices I've ever made that truly matter. Everything else was just noise. You are my purpose, Elena, you and our children, and the work we've done together. That's my legacy, and I'm proud of it. Good, Elena said, her eyes shining. Because you are mine too, Adrian. My purpose, my partner, my love. I look at everything we've built, everything we've accomplished, and I know that giving you that second chance was the best decision I ever made. They stood together in the garden, holding each other while the night deepened around them. Inside Blackwood House, their family and friends were settling in, the sounds of laughter drifting out through the open windows. This house, once so grand and empty, was now filled with love and life and meaning. Adrian thought about the man he had been when he first inherited the dukedom. Young, idealistic, determined to be the perfect duke. He had spent years trying to fulfill that vision, trying to be what others demanded, and he had nearly lost himself in the process. It had taken loving Elena, losing her and finding her again to understand that being perfect according to someone else's standards was worthless compared to being authentic according to his own values. The scandal that had once threatened to destroy him had instead liberated him. By choosing love over duty, by defying convention for the sake of happiness, he had discovered a freedom he hadn't known was possible. He was no longer bound by others' expectations. He was simply Adrian, husband, father, reformer, duke when necessary, but human being first and always. And Elena, his brilliant, courageous Elena, had been the catalyst for that transformation. She had never asked him to change. She had simply shown him, through her example and her love, that a different kind of life was possible. That duty and happiness didn't have to be enemies. That position could be used for purpose. That love was not a distraction from important work, but the foundation that made all other work meaningful. As they finally turned to go back inside, Adrian paused on the threshold and looked back at the garden, at the house, at the life they had created together. "Thank you," he said softly. Elena looked up at him questioningly. "For what?" "For not giving up on me," Adrian said. "For being brave enough to give me a second chance. For teaching me what really matters. For loving me even when I didn't deserve it. For building this life with me. For everything, Elena. Thank you for everything." Elena's response was a kiss, deep and tender, and full of all the love they had shared across the years. When they finally broke apart, she smiled. "Thank you for being worth the risk. Thank you for proving that sometimes love really does conquer all. Thank you for being my partner in this grand adventure." They went inside together, back to their family, back to their purpose, back to the life they had fought for and earned. And as Adrian closed the door behind them, shutting out the night and embracing the warmth within, he knew with absolute certainty that he was the most fortunate man in all of England. Not because he was a duke, though he was, not because he had wealth or position, though he had some of each, but because he had loved deeply, chosen bravely, and built a life that mattered. Because he had Elena by his side now and always. Because he had learned finally and completely that the greatest power a person could possess was the courage to follow their heart, even when the whole world said it was foolish. And in the end, that was the true measure of nobility. Not titles or lineage or social position, but the strength to love authentically, to live purposefully, and to create something meaningful from the raw materials of courage and conviction. Adrian Blackwood, Duke of Blackwood, had finally understood that lesson, and in understanding it, he had found everything he had ever really needed. The years that followed their 25th anniversary were golden ones. Adrian and Elena watched their grandchildren grow, delighting in each new personality. They continued their work, though at a slower pace, knowing that the foundations they had built were strong enough to outlast them. Their children ensured that their legacy continued. The school network expanded. The Medical Foundation funded breakthrough research. Blackwood House remained a center for education and reform. And the story of the Duke who risked everything for love became a legend, told and retold to remind people that the greatest courage is not in conforming to expectations, but in following one's heart. Adrian and Elena Blackwood had set out to build a life together, to prove that love was worth fighting for. In doing so, they had created something far larger than themselves, a legacy of purpose, compassion, and courage that would ripple forward through time. Their love story, which began with a chance encounter and survived scandal, separation, and society's disapproval, became a testament to the transformative power of genuine connection. It reminded people that the greatest adventures are not found in distant lands or grand achievements, but in the courage to love deeply, to live authentically, and to build something meaningful with another person who shares your values and dreams. The Duke and Duchess of Blackwood had lived well, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. In the end, what more could anyone ask from a life? Thank you for staying with us until the end of this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe, like, comment, and share our channel. Your support inspires us to keep creating more stories of love, redemption, and breathtaking twists. Help us reach our first 2,000 subscribers, and together we'll continue sharing tales that warm the heart. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another of our historical stories. Click and let yourself be enchanted by another unforgettable tale. With all our gratitude, echoes of romance.